Aloha nerds, and welcome back to another TheSalawag's Widespread Gut Reaction. I am your host, TheSalawag, and on this show I react from the gut about things I have seen. Aloha nerds, and welcome back to another episode of TheSalawag's Widespread Gut Reaction. On this show I watch movies and I react from the gut. I want to talk to you a bit about the movie Unbreakable, directed by M. Night Shyamalan, starring Bruce Willis and Robin Wright. This is an excellent film. It's a film from the year 2000, very much before Spider-Man, but after Blade. And it was an early superhero movie not based off of a comic book property. I think it's one of the few ones, Meteor Man and Up, Up, and Away, and Blank Man. They're just a handful of new superheroes not based off of comic book properties, but originally generated by the writer-directors who made them. In this case, Unbreakable was written and directed by M. Night Shyamalan. This was his film that followed The Sixth Sense, which also starred Bruce Willis, and precedes Signs, the much maligned Signs, which I'll eventually do a video on. And for the gut reaction aspect of this video, I'll just get right to it. If you have not seen the movie Unbreakable, the story is about David Dunn, a security guard at a university, who has just survived a horrific train accident where everyone else on the train died except for him. And not only is he the only one that survived, but he survived without injuries, without any scratches or anything. There's no evidence to show he had been on the train at all because of how miraculously he survived. And it's a movie-long journey for him to discover that he's in fact a superhero. But it's not that he discovers it on his own. Elijah Price, played by Samuel L. Jackson, is a art dealer, art collector, who is fascinated with comic books and superhero stories, and he believes that David Dunn, Bruce Willis' character, is in fact a superhero and evidence of the existence of superhumans in the world. And in many ways, although he tries to look at superheroes through a realistic perspective, he tries to look at it through a sense of understanding that science and evolution play a part in these instances. Essentially, Samuel Jackson's character believes that superheroes exist. David Dunn's one of them, and he must go. And really, it's Elijah Price's character who's pushing this out of David Dunn, saying, "You are a superhero. You are born capable of things greater than ordinary people." And what's interesting from a character point of view is that Elijah Price actually is a character, a human person, who has a bone disorder where his bones don't reach a certain density, so any amount of pressure can break his bones. So we have sort of this beautiful irony happening here where our sort of coach character is talking to the young football star, trying to get him to realize he's a football star and he needs to play the game. But the football star is neglecting his sort of given talent. And it's a whole movie about that relationship. But, despite being a superhero movie, it's so low key. It's very, very much dry and kind of real. And it's kind of about these semi-boring people. Not to say that the movie's boring or that the performances are bad, but David Dunn is he's so low-key and he's so reserved. And Robin Wright, who plays his wife in the movie, she is also very low-key and very reserved. It's their child who's the only one who's like kind of bouncy and kind of like excited to see the possibilities of Elijah Price's superhero theory. So essentially, you have a whole movie about a man discovering he's a superhero, being pushed to really accept and embrace his unique gifts by this other character who is, you know, skeptical but sincerely believes that this train incident is proof that he is what he is. So it's a very it's a slow movie, but it's not a bad movie. It's not slow in the sense of not being entertaining. It's just an intentionally kind of slowly paced movie, and it's got kind of an interesting character about it. It's shot in a very engaging way. It's not like Uncut Gems where you feel like you're in a documentary about this messed up version of Adam Sandler. But it's much more like a series of still photographs about someone dealing with something. One thing that's kind of a consistent deal in all of M. Night Shyamalan's early work is characters dealing with some kind of horrific trauma. In The Sixth Sense, that movie opens up with Bruce Willis's character, who is a child therapist / psychologist who has just won an award for his great work in the city. But one of his former patients, now an adult, someone who he didn't properly help because he didn't understand what the kid was going through, he's one of the ones that fell through the cracks. He's one of the ones that Bruce Willis did not effectively help. And the kid essentially blames him for not believing in, or the adult, formerly a kid, blames him for not believing a certain situation he was going through as a kid and trying to convince him otherwise. But Bruce Willis, at the time, just thinking that was his job. And this guy shoots Bruce Willis, and that's the opening of Sixth Sense. And essentially Bruce Willis survives and spends the rest of the movie trying to make this failure right. And he finds a new kid with a very similar issue to the one who, as an adult, shot him. And he realizes, okay, well, this kid has a similar problem to that other guy. This is my opportunity to finally do the right thing. And essentially, there's a lot of growth going on in that movie, but his life has ripple effects from that opening scene. And he himself is changed and messed up by that scene because he feels like there's this thing that's undone. Or there's this thing he has not achieved yet, and he needs to achieve it in order to get his life back together. Very, very not typical necessarily, but very kind of conventional kind of story. Very, very human. And also in that movie, Bruce Willis is playing a more low-key kind of character. I think this is just sort of M. Night Shyamalan's type of character. Maybe that's kind of how he is, or how he feels about himself on the inside, because he has a lot of main characters who are like that, especially, again, in his early work. But essentially, David Dunn is having a similar thing where he survived something haunting. And he's already a low-key guy, but now he's just kind of got this extra weight on him of the thing that he went through, that now also everyone's kind of skeptical of him because he survived it. But people kind of just move on and think, well, whatever, freak things happen all the time. And that's kind of the challenge of Unbreakable, is this man who's presumably, his gift is being unbreakable, being convinced by a man whose body is physically very breakable that he is a superhero. And, you know, when he finally makes the revelation, it feels very earned. And when he becomes the superhero at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, he realizes he's a superhero, spoiler. But when you reach that point in the movie, it really feels earned and it makes sense. And, you know, don't worry about that spoiler, because, I mean, that's the whole journey of the movie from the start anyway. But when he makes that transformation, there's something powerful about it. Because he's such a low-key guy, and to be a superhero, in essence, is to not necessarily be low-key, to kind of put yourself out there and get in a kind of situation that, as a normal guy, you wouldn't want to be in. And so you kind of have that sense of that journey inside of Bruce Willis, although it's very understated. There's something very human and normal about it that's relatable. The whole movie feels relatable. It's the most believable, realistic superhero movie ever made. I think Blank Man I would put right underneath that, except that it's also not a realistic movie at all. But that's my benchmark for realistic movies. I think Blank Man kind of lives in the real world, and Unbreakable feels like it's in the real world. I like movies that have superheroes that live in our world. I think Batman Begins definitely achieves that, but it has a fast-paced James Bond quality to it that kind of elevates it from being that normal, you can relate to it, A-movie drama. Whereas Unbreakable feels like a normal, you can relate to it, A-movie drama, but the drama is that you're a superhero. Okay, cool. But it's a great little movie. So that's just my kind of review of it and recommendation. Check out Unbreakable. His powers are cool. The presentation's very interesting. Very, very low-key movie. It's not your typical flashbang action movie. There's one action scene in the entire movie. One. And again, it feels real, and it just feels like what you might see in the given situation. You know, still heroic, but not you know, none of, you know, but there's plenty of movies for that, so this movie doesn't require that. But okay, so that's kind of my review and recommendation. Go see Unbreakable. Those are the strengths about the movie from an audience perspective. Now I want to get into the Why It's Great segment. Why is Unbreakable great? This is going to require actual spoilers for the movie. So if you haven't seen Unbreakable and you don't want the experience spoiled, please do not watch any further. Please go watch the movie and then you can play this during the credits or something. Why It's Great. Why It's Great is my other podcast where I talk about why movies are great from a technical filmmaker point of view. So that's what I'm going to do now about Unbreakable. And I'm really just going to reiterate things to you that are, like I said, available to you. You can fact check what I'm saying. This is my bibliography right here. Unbreakable Blu-ray bonus materials. So nothing that I'm saying is something that you can't verify yourself. That's the number one rule on this show. You should be able to verify. If I say something academic, you should be able to verify it, or through some means, you know, test it against something else that I'm talking about and see where I'm coming from. So why is it great? Like I said, this movie is about really two characters. David Dunn, guy survives an accident, realizes he's a superhero, who's basically unbreakable. That's his gift. And Elijah Price, who's trying to convince him that he's a superhero, who's actually very physically breakable. So right there, well, there's a lot of themes going on in that statement, but we're not here to talk about the themes. I'm here to talk about how we achieve that emotional experience. Because when you reach the end of this movie, there is an emotional experience. It's not the highest high, but there's something there that feels very much lived in and real by the end of the movie. You know, the movie feels like you're living the real life story behind something you would read in a newspaper of, oh my God, this horrible thing happened to this family, but this guy came in at the last minute and saved the kids. It feels like you got to walk into the life of the guy who did that great thing. That's what I like about Unbreakable. So that's the part of the emotional experience that I think is great about the movie. His journey to becoming a superhero and what he achieves when he embraces those gifts, that's really something special. But how do we get there? How does M. Night Shyamalan achieve that in a technical filmmaker point of view? One of the ways he achieves that, what I'm talking about for the majority of this segment, is color story. In essence, how do you use the colors in your movie to tell the story? For those who are colorblind, I am sorry. I'll just describe the colors because I have to. Trust me, they're different from each other. I don't know if you know that. I'm so sorry for being prejudiced against colorblind people right now. Yeah, I have a lot to learn in my life. It's true. I'm sorry. Anyway, so what I want to talk about why it's great for this movie is color story. How is the color used to tell the story of these characters? Now, actually, let me back up a little bit and talk about color story in just a basic sense, just so you can now understand how it might be used in a movie. The Matrix has a perfect form of color story, which is basically how you identify and separate environments. So, one thing you may notice if you watch The Matrix is that, and if you don't know what The Matrix is, essentially human beings are trapped in a virtual digital world where their minds are all linked together, and basically they're all living Grand Theft Auto 5. But, it appears to be 1999 at the time of The Matrix. But when you're pulled out of the Matrix and it's just this thing that's stuck in your head and you're connected to a hard-lined internet. Essentially, once you get pulled out of the Matrix, you're in the real world, which is like a scummy, grimy, the world has been destroyed. It's blue and it's brown and it's dark and it's kind of grungy. But the Matrix is green. And when you're in it, the world is modern. It's 90s modern, but it's modern concrete jungle. But the world is kind of color schemed green, and so that color scheme differentiation is basically a common film tool for just identifying your location. In the case of Hellboy, for instance, Hellboy, the character is red. He's a monster with horns on his head. His skin is red. He has a big red right hand. And the only other characters in that movie that wear the color red are characters who are directly tied to Hellboy. So the room that Hellboy, one of the lounge sort of the study that Hellboy has, a room full of books. The study in Hellboy's home is red and gold. The love of his life, Liz Sherman, played by Selma Blair, she wears red in almost every single scene. John Hurt, who plays Hellboy's father, he has a little bit of red going on in his clothing. And, essentially each character that's emotionally tied to him wears or is featured in a red space at some point. And that's another form of color storytelling. But in that case, Del Toro uses the color to connect the characters to each other. You see, there's always a different usage of color storytelling. Sometimes it's to simplify your locations and help the audience understand what location they're in. In other cases, it's to connect characters and how do characters connect to one another. There's many different methods of color story. What I'm going to talk about Unbreakable is a little bit different, but also connected to the character's change and transformation. In the case of Unbreakable, the movie starts off, the opening scene of Unbreakable is the birth of Elijah Price. And it starts off, you hear this baby crying, you see this beautiful woman holding her baby, she's very happy, and she's in a department store, so she's given birth inside of a department store. There's a couple women waiting by the door, and the doctor shows up, and the doctor checks out the baby and discovers that all of the kid's arms and legs are broken, and that's why the baby's been crying, because the mom asks him, like, the baby's been crying for a while, is this normal? And he checks the baby out, and yeah, bones are broken. It's horrifying, and the mom shudders and cries because she can't believe this whole time that this is what happened. And this whole scene, however, is lit very warmly. So it's a very kind of comforting, earthy quality to it. And it takes place, I think, in the 60s or 70s. I can't remember exactly. But there's something very warm about it. And like I said, the mom is very beautiful, and she's holding her baby in a very tender, caring way. It's just a very sweet image. But the camera work also, this whole scene is done in a single shot, where there's also a mirror in the scene, and the camera will turn and look at the mirror, looking at the doctor, or looking at the mirror to look at the mom at certain points during the scene, which I think it's what they would call cinema verite. I don't freaking know. I don't remember that part of my filmmaking learning. But it in many ways feels very docu-style. It almost feels like you're sitting there yourself watching the scene. And again, it's just part of the quality that makes the movie feel real and lived in. Because the camera will turn at certain moments, but it feels very natural to the scene because the way these people are talking to each other. So you just feel like, well, you would naturally go this way anyway. That kind of, just documentary style, but still very warm opening. It's just very, it's engrossing up front. And again, the colors are like yellow and orange and a little bit of purple. And it's very, again, it's warm, it's comforting, but the news is very shocking, And so we're kind of introduced to a loving mother who immediately learns that her just born son has some kind of condition or issue right at birth, and it's going to turn out to be a lifelong issue for that child. But that's how this movie starts. So it starts off very real, very warm, very welcoming, and then very tragic. And then the very next scene we cut to, we are inside of a train, and Bruce Willis has just sat down in his seat, and he has his head against the window, and the train is very blue. Everything is color toned very blue. And we're in the present day, and a very pretty girl sits next to Bruce Willis, and then the camera, staying in one shot again, moves down to look at Bruce's hands, and he takes a ring off of his finger and hides the ring. And then when the girl looks at him and asks, if she can have one of the magazines, he uses that as a way into a conversation. And he gets a few laughs out of her, and then he makes a move, and then when he makes the move, the woman gets immediately uncomfortable, reveals she has a wedding ring, and then gets out of the seat and walks away. And then Bruce Willis puts his head back on the window, sad. He starts off kind of sad, and there's kind of this loneliness to him. We don't know what his problem is, but we know he's going through something. So visual communication is very strong here, where M. Night Shyamalan doesn't waste a second. Like, every second we're on a character and their emotional state. Like I said, the first scene opens up with the beautiful image of a loving mother holding her newborn baby. And then the next scene opens with the image of a very sad-looking, lonely man who hides his wedding ring and tries to pick up a girl, and it doesn't work out, and he just goes back to being sad. And it's sort of, it's all very still and calm. But there's a sort of a different film language going on as well. So the camera work on the Elijah Price birth scene is very shaky cam. Well, it's a little bit shaky cam, but it feels very much like you're there. It's kind of a little bit more kind of aggressive and real. And then when we see, and it's warm, again, the colors are warm, and then when we see Bruce Willis, it's the camera's kind of still. It moves, but it moves for the reason it moves, and it moves back. And the stillness is part of, like, the stillness of this character. He is stuck in a rut in an emotional sense. Because we'll learn later his life has not gone the way he totally wants it to go. And as visible with the wedding ring, he's clearly trying to hook up with someone despite having a wife. We don't know that there's more to that, but right up front, visually, we're getting a lot of storytelling going on. So the filmmaking is doing everything it can while using as little as it can. They could have done this all with cuts and edits. That would be a very Nolan-y thing to do. Or if it was Guillermo del Toro, the camera wouldn't stop moving. It would just get everything, and the shot would be way too beautiful to appreciate the performances at some points. No offense. You know, it would just be so beautiful. You'd be distracted by the beauty at times. But in Shyamalan style, which I think is sort of an inch toward Nolan and half an inch toward Del Toro in terms of camera usage. You know, the camera is telling us something in the way it's still and the way it moves. It tells us something about who that character is, but the color tells you about where they are in their states of mind. Because across the movie, as David meets Elijah, you know, each scene up until they meet has individual color schemes. But when both characters meet, they meet at Elijah Price's studio, where he sells his collected artworks. And the studio very much is silver, and there's kind of a blue overall tone to everything. And it's when they sit down, Elijah Price sits in front of this beautiful piece of cutout rock that has all these symbols on it, and it looks like it's from Egypt. It has, you know, ancient languages written on it that definitely I don't know, but it's warm. So Elijah Price sits in this warm box, and all around him is this coldness, the coldness of Bruce Willis. And Bruce Willis has a kid who, again, is happy to be there, happy to be hanging out with his dad. You know, but Bruce Willis himself, he is the coldness. You know, he's sort of locked off himself from his goals and his dreams and his wants and his needs. We'll learn between these scenes that actually he's in the process of divorcing his wife, and then they're about to split, and you know, he was waiting to get a job somewhere else. And this train incident essentially forces this family to stay together, because they almost lost him. You know, not yet divorced wife almost loses her husband, and the son almost loses his father. And that really becomes this thing that gels this sort of distant, cold family back together. And that's also a journey that's happening across this whole movie. That sort of Robin Wright is the warmth in his life. You know, she's kind of dirty brown blonde, wears warmer colors and green and stuff like that. And David Dunn is always just kind of opaque and kind of, he doesn't totally feel like he's there. And Elijah Price essentially suggests in their first scene, like, is there something that you feel you're not doing in your life? Because that feeling, you know, if my belief is right, is that feeling comes from you being a superhero and not embracing it, and not going out and doing what you know you're meant to do. And, you know, this is one of the handful of scenes that actually has cuts and uses different angles, because essentially this is where the film languages are meeting. You know, the film language of one world is meeting the film language of a different world, and both worlds are in the same movie. So again, color story, Elijah Price in a box of language, in a box of color and warmth and knowledge. And, you know, Bruce Willis, the Unbreakable character, is in a world of steel and coldness and space and distance, and he's distant from his family. You know, we'll find out across Elijah Price's flashbacks and, you know, modern day scenes that he has a very warm, you know, good connection with his mother. You know, he seems to be single, but, you know, he does have this warm connection. And the female character, although kind of just the female character in many times, I think that's the one thing holding this particular movie back. Something I think way corrected by The Village. I don't think M. Night Shyamalan meant to. Am I ever going to say it right? I know how to say it when I'm not on video. He'll correct this later with The Village, but it's definitely one of the notable things of his, or you don't want to note it. You know, in this particular movie, Robin Wright feels like an underwritten character, I think, but it's just that David Dunn and Robin Wright's character, they're both these muted people. These kind of boring, muted people. That's just who these characters are. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that if that's what this character is. But in David Dunn's case, he's making himself boring. Because truth be told, he has this gift he's not trying to achieve. You know, it's one thing if you don't have the gift, and then, okay, that's one thing. But he has the gift, and he's not trying to achieve it. And why is that? What's holding him back? But across the movie, like I said, these colors change. So as the love story gets tighter, and as David gets closer to understanding he's a superhero, the color scheme in his world starts to get warmer. And as Elijah Price starts to get more and more evidence to prove that, in fact, this guy is a superhero, his world gets colder. Because in many ways, you know, David Dunn's reaction is like anybody's reaction. It's like, dude, you're crazy. You're a crazy person, and you're talking crazy crap to me. And later on, Elijah Price, as the movie goes on, his kind of madness is kind of revealed because he's just had this obsession. But we get this beautiful flashback for him where his mother finds him staring at a television, sitting down alone in a room in the dark, and he's got, you know, his arm in a brace, and, you know, he's just miserable. And the mother tells him, like, you can't just sit here and be miserable. You need to go out there and live your life. Whatever life you have, you need to live it. And she tells him, I left a gift for you outside. And he looks outside the window. There's a little present inside of a box sitting on a bench. And she says, that's for you. And he's like, someone's going to grab it. And he's like, well then, and then she says, well then you better go and get it. And he goes out and gets it. And inside the box is a comic book. And so even though it's never stated through dialogue, this moment is the origin of Elijah Price's love and fixation on superheroes. And it is that fixation that leads him to this belief that helps him unlock David's understanding that he in fact is a superhero and capable of great things. And all Elijah's really looking for, you know, at the forefront of this movie, all he's looking for is just like proof that his beliefs are valid. Because he is so crazy that eventually he does meet David's wife. And it becomes a very uncomfortable conversation for the wife, because she, knowing what his condition is and with her job and what she's used to, and the way that Elijah Price knows her name before she even introduces herself, and goes on to tell her story. That she kind of gets this hint that this guy's really not right in the head. And so these hints are also part of the buildup of that color story. The colors of the movie are telling a part of the story, are affecting your emotions. That is part of what gets you when we reach the ending. There's a real twist. Now, spoiler territory. If you have not seen Unbreakable, don't watch any further. Go watch Unbreakable, and then get back here. Okay, spoiler territory has been entered. When we reach the very end of the movie, and David Dunn has finally gone out and finally done his first real superhero thing, and he's gotten his wife back, and his life is finally on track, and his world is warm. His home is warm. It's still kind of got that dingy, cold spaciness to it, but it's a warmer space. And when he enters Elijah's gallery, which is now currently, having a huge opening, and or having a huge event where people are looking around and checking out the art and buying stuff. When he goes to the back to talk to Elijah, and you get the sense he's going to thank him. He's going to thank him for helping him realize himself. He discovers that in the back, spoiler territory, are all these plans for bombing places and all these parts of bombs that he's in the process of building. Throughout this movie, we see Elijah Price in the back, but we don't see the back. We see him come in and out of the back. But this space is cold and it's dark, you know, and it's the farthest away from the rest of the gallery. And, you know, the lighting and the color is telling the story of where this character has gone. He started off young with hopes and dreams and warmth and love. But his condition has left him so lonely that there's just this one part of him that has never been able to heal. He has always had this broken part of him on the inside that could, you know, only through the search for superheroes could he find some meaning and function in his life. At least that's how he felt. Very much he himself could have used all his resources to help people in need and become the Lex Luthor of good. But this broken part of him has led him to becoming a homegrown terrorist. And essentially the reveal is Elijah Price was the one who rigged the train David Dunn was on to run off his tracks and kill everybody. So that reveal, the room is cold. It's the darkest scene in the whole movie. Literally the darkest, the least amount of light in the scene. And the only people who are lit, essentially, are David and Elijah. And again, it's cold. In this world, it's cold. And one of the great powers of David Dunn is that he can touch someone and know their sin. Whatever sin they have done, whether it's just the one sin or multiple sins, I don't know. Or maybe their most recent sin. But he touches them and he knows their sins. And so he shakes hands with Elijah and he sees the last flashbacks for Elijah Price, and there are him before the start of this movie causing other horrific incidents. And he sees all these newspapers all around the back of the gallery of other horrific events where there was one survivor or a single survivor. And you realize, you know, at the very least, Elijah's been obsessed with natural disasters and looking for the survivors and figuring out what happened. But without question, seeing all the detonators and pieces of bombs, without question, he has actually committed the sins that he has witnessed by shaking Elijah's hand. And essentially the movie ends with Bruce back in the cold. But, you know, having gone through this entire journey, he got out of the cold. He got out of the cold for a real good minute. But back into that cold, he found his arch nemesis in an ironic kind of way. That's the beautiful thing about this movie, because the mentor is the arch nemesis. You know, without his villainy, David Dunn would have never discovered his powers. He would have gone on, split up with his wife, things would have never worked. But that arch villainy requiring the hero to step up and discover it going on, you know, it's like this beautiful chicken and egg loop, you know. And the hints toward other superheroes are nice in this movie. Essentially, this is the Superman story. Tarantino already calls this movie the new age Superman story, which it is. That's very much what's going on. But we get a little hint of the Flash at some point in the movie when the son talks about a guy who can run like a 40 meter dash in a really fast amount of time. And it's just that because you know superhero movies and you know superhero rules, whenever someone has just a little bit more skill or talent or strength than they should, you know that it's a hint of so much more, because that's the genre that we're in. So essentially we get a Superman story with a hint toward the Flash. And it's kind of too bad that this Flash character never comes up in Unbreakable, in Split or Glass, which follow this movie. But that's color story right there. So, and why did I bring this up? Why did I decide to tell you all this shit about the color? Because that is visual communication. That's a part of film language. Film language is going to be a very important aspect of future episodes of Gut Reaction, and my podcast, Why It's Great, will be returning later this year. I'll be completing the Spider-Man series. I have a little multi-part podcast episode on Spider-Man, the movie from 2002, directed by Sam Raimi. I have a little multi-part podcast set for my Why It's Great podcast that's going to be continued later this year. I've already shot a couple episodes. They'll be coming out maybe in November or something. I'm going to continue the Why It's Great podcast. And this episode of Gut Reaction is really a sort of a 10 minutes of gut reaction to get into a kind of a backdoor Why It's Great episode. Because Why It's Great is going to be more of this. Film language is an important aspect of storytelling, and how you use it is how you affect the audience. So you, the audience, things are happening to you on the screen that you're not aware of, and being aware of those things is a tool. It is an important tool for your mind, because we live in an age of media. It is the age of media, where the media can change your mind about anything. Any media can change your mind about anything. And better to be equipped with knowledge of how it works, so that you have a tool against manipulation. That is the point. People are going to try to manipulate you at every turn, and especially with media. It's very important to know what the filmmakers are using, because anybody can use these tools. You can use these tools. These tools are being used on you constantly. Everything you think of as normal uses these tools. It's a set of tools that manipulates your mind to tell you a narrative, to tell you a story. And color story. What is story? Story is character. Conflict is character. Character is story. Character has a conflict or a problem within themselves that they must change. The journey of that change is what makes a story. Color story communicates the story of the character. Color story is how you communicate emotion to the audience. Performance, storytelling through performance, which I talk about in Why It's Great. Storytelling through performance, meaning the performance gets you to understand a certain thing. When you know what these things are, these are tools for you. My primary goal with telling you all this crap is that if you're a filmmaker and you're aspiring to tell stories, and also if you're an audience member and you kind of want to crack the code on why stories are affecting you in a certain way, this is one of the things that filmmakers use to connect things and create emotional connective tissue that you can relate to, that's also subtle. It doesn't overwhelm your mind. It has to be there, but without taking over your mind, so that essentially you can absorb it by the story's end. And the more effective that storytelling is, the better the movie is. And Unbreakable is without a question. On a technical level, the use of color story is perfect. So anyway, that's what I got to say on Unbreakable. That's my gut reaction and why it's great. If you want more why it's great, that podcast is on youtube.com/TheSalawag. And if you want more gut reaction, just remember, don't like, don't subscribe, and don't comment. So aloha, and have a good one, yo.